Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Vires and Numeris podcast, a Briar.io production. Special thanks to our sponsors, as always, Thunder Games. Thunder Games creates games that integrate Bitcoin and process payments via the Lightning Network and run their own node. If you wish to connect, their public key is available over at Thunder, THNDR.games/. You can also check out their social media over there, and a link to their Telegram is provided. Thunder Games are making mobile games which enable players to win Bitcoin for free while using the Lightning Network to send prizes. I love to see what Thunder Games is up to and the advocacy of Bitcoin and the Lightning Network. So check them out, thundergames.com or thunder.games. The Bob Shop. The Bob Shop is the most diverse blockchain and crypto clothing store that I've come across on the web. They have it all: privacy coins, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Bexy Exchange, Mimblewimble, hoodies, hats, shoes, tees. It's all over at bobcrypto.co. Zen Sports is a peer-to-peer decentralized application built on the Icon blockchain that enables players to set their own games, lines, and more using blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies. Players can get in and out of games with fiat or crypto and enjoy gambling from the comfort of their own homes with smaller fees than centralized bookmakers and casinos. Visit zensports.com and check them out. Make sure to gamble responsibly as always, and ensure gambling is legal in your jurisdiction. Lucio Paletti is a digital artist and self-described propagandist known for his iconic Bitcoin artworks. Lucio's number one goal is to spread the message that Bitcoin is better money. Check out luciopaletti.com. That's LucioPoletti.com. And he is the artist that created that beautiful Andy Warhol on the wall. Flashcoin. Flashcoin is a reinvention of Litecoin, built to scale for worldwide commerce and fast enough to handle everyday transactions. The flexible and easy to integrate core code allows exchanges and wallets to add Flash to their platform within hours. With settlement time of around 5 seconds and consensus within 2 minutes, anyone, anywhere can use Flash Mobile Wallet as easily as cash or credit card. Visit flashcoin.io and check out their map on there that allows you to see merchants around the world and providing, goods and services like the free market was intended, peer-to-peer, voluntarily. And remember, nothing written or spoken on Briar.io should be interpreted as financial or investment advice. Always do your own research. You are the captain of your own ship. You are in control of your financial sovereignty. And please enjoy this episode with Gold, Silver, Bitcoin.com's Justin O'Connell. Welcome back. This is episode 27 of the Vires and Numeris podcast, a Briar.io production. My books, articles, podcasts are all over on my site at Briar.io, and I just launched a weekly newsletter every Sunday on patreon.com/RL Briar. That's 6 cents a day, $2 a month. You get that in the daily vlog. But today's guest, let's get straight into it. He's the owner of Gold, Silver, and Bitcoin.com, where he sells gold and silver and hosts his own podcast, the aptly named Gold, Silver, Bitcoin podcast. Mr. Justin O'Connell, thanks for coming on the show today, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. This is perfect timing to have you on with the U.S. dollar dumping right now. The U.S. dollar index opened today at 94.63. Gold approaching all-time highs at around 1900 right now, and silver also making a move. So I kind of asked you to come on last week before all this big specie money move, but here we are.
Well, I think that the soil had been tended for this moment in recent months, particularly starting in March as the Great Lockdown, as the IMF termed it, was implemented globally. And I think that really kind of sowed the seeds for economic crises. And we are in the early stages of that. There's been a lot of thinkers and writers who have called this the Great Reset. And there's going to need to be lots of stimulus printed by governments. We're kind of going into stimulus package number 2 in the United States. There's a lot of talk of there being more $1,200 checks sent to people, a continuance of the $600 bonus unemployment, And unlike the 0809 bailouts, in which this money was essentially sent to the banks, this is being put into the pockets of the people, which might seem good in some ways. However, it could quicken the likelihood of there being an inflationary episode in the US dollar. And so, of course, with stocks constantly reaching all-time highs, it makes sense for investors to consider other assets such as gold, precious metals generally, as well as Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. Ethereum has had a 2-year period in which a lot of DeFi apps have been built, but the price has not necessarily reflected this development. And I think that we are starting to see some of the price catch up to some of the DeFi kind of innovations, if you will.
Yeah, real quick to show everyone the prices here for posterity. Bitcoin actually just broke out across that $9,600 level that I've been looking at. I think we could see cross $1,000 pretty quick now if I'm correct. It's up 2.9% for the day. Ethereum on a tear, as you mentioned, up 13.92% for the day. And I have my eye very closely on Link. I've been watching it since it was under $2 and during the stock market collapse, basically, that we saw in March, and it's up obviously, over 300% since then. So I'm watching that very closely. I'm not a financial advisor, but there's a lot to keep an eye on right now. Here's what gold's looking at, just under $1,900, silver at $22.79, and as I mentioned, the U.S. dollar index at 94.61. The dollar really falling hard this week. And then I wanted to quickly mention U.S. national debt over 26.5 trillion now. So I got that on the list here in a minute. We'll get into that. But so much to talk about today. I always like to get a little background. This is the first time you've been on my show. Where did you grow up as a youth, and what kind of student were you?
I grew up in San Diego, and I was not the best student. I focused more on baseball and never really did too much homework, but I was always interested in history and the world. So, I read what I wanted to read, and, baseball was great because I think it's a beautiful sport. It was pointed out to me that perhaps one of the reasons why I have gravitated to economics was because baseball has a lot of statistics involved in it, and perhaps that kind of primed me to understand statistics and probability more so than otherwise would have been the case. But I really started focusing on academics in college. I went to school outside of Portland, Oregon, which is kind of a hotspot currently in the news, and there I studied history. My focus was on the 20th century. And thereafter, I started learning about economics and kind of the different schools of thought, from Keynesianism to Austrian economics. And that led me into the precious metals industry. My first job was in the precious metals industry as a trader, a marketer, and various other gigs and jobs. And then from there, I discovered Bitcoin, and a gentleman named Trace Mayer, who was an early Bitcoin adopter and former gold bug, really spoke with me and said that Bitcoin was an interesting opportunity. And so I entered that market in 2012.
Wow. So you found Bitcoin very early on as well. One of the early adopters. Yeah, I also enjoy baseball real quick. I think that I agree. I think it's one of the more intellectual type sports like baseball, golf. There's also a beauty to soccer to me, like the chess match in soccer. But yeah, I can see the statistics side of baseball leading you into that. So this is on my list of questions to talk to you about, finding Austrian economics. Do you have a favorite Austrian economics text or author?
I've been following Thomas Sowell lately, and what I like about Austrian economics generally is that it's, I think, the clearest explanation of relationships between people. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about the economic system in which we live. Capitalism is blamed for a lot, but nobody watching this podcast has really ever lived under a capitalist system.
Right.
And I think that there's a great misunderstanding it's really a misunderstanding of history more than anything. which informs people's opinions about economics and how economics work. And unfortunately, they're all woefully wrong, generally speaking. And this is why we get into situations where, people don't understand that there are cascading effects of quarantining healthy people in mass and requiring small businesses to shut down, that then precludes the necessitation of quantitative easing policies and the damage that those quantitative easing policies do. This is nothing new in history. We can look back to the Roman Empire, the collapse of the Roman Empire, and devaluation of their precious metals based currencies like their silver currencies. Towards the end of that empire, they would constantly lower the amount of precious metals that were in that money. And we've seen that process here play out in the United States, not just since the 2008-2009 bailouts, but really dating back to the 60s, when our currency coinage was devalued or debased of its silver content up until 1965 in this country. So all quarters, dimes, halves with a date 1964 and before on them had a silver content. They were 90% silver, and they were debased. And during his speech, LBJ mentioned that, don't panic, that these coins would still be circulating. However, people who back then probably had a greater understanding of economics than we do today hoarded them immediately. And I remember working at a coin shop in about 2011, as silver reached $50 per ounce or just under, and a gentleman came in with bags and bags of junk silver. Mm-hmm. He had been operating a bunch of gumball machines, essentially, over decades, and he had collected all the silver coinage that he received, and he cashed out just about $2 million worth of coinage. And that is how much the silver content had increased from that early coinage. And I think that people don't understand this process, and it's a process that's clear as day. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of people that don't have the humility to admit that they have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to history, and therefore when it comes to economics.
Wow, you just hit on a lot there. I agree with everything you just said. Historically speaking, I think it's very important to understand, I think that's why my favorite author is probably Rothbard, my favorite economist. He does a better job than any other Austrian, in my opinion, of breaking down the history. And one of the things he said is that, these people who get into politics and policymakers and all these centralized positions, they didn't just come to us through the ether. They did things before they became politicians, and they have these sort of connections and special interests that aren't talked about on cable news or whatever. And I think that's one of the most important things to understand. I quit watching television over a decade ago, and it's very interesting to just judge people. You can sort of tell people's worldview when you're talking to them, whether they watch television or not today. And then you talked about the debasement of currencies. Well, I don't know what those ridges are called on the side of the coins, but that dated back to the Roman Empire. People think that that's just today it's just kind of a fancy thing on our coinage, right? But back then, that's actually how they debased the money, right? They took chunks of the actual gold or silver out of the coins, right?
Yeah, and it was done step by step, and it's just essentially came down to it was an ancient form of money printing.
Right. And what was the last thing you mentioned that I wanted to ask you about? Can't remember. What was the last thing you finished on when you were talking?
Well, I talked a little bit about LBJ's speech about debasing the currency in the United States, and also, just about how, history is such an important thing for people to understand, and few people do understand it. And a lot of it is because, they get their view from the television. And I agree with you that I think that there should be television has a bad enough reputation as it is. The internet has a much better reputation, but I think we should be a little bit more critical about the internet and the way in which information is disseminated through it. I mean, especially as it is today with social media, just a few companies where the information is presented to us. But, I guess my main point was that, you asked about Austrian economics, mm-hmm. and I arrived on Austrian economics through the study of history, particularly the 20th century. And it was, almost a natural process. People like Ron Paul made much more sense to me in a historical context. And he has a terrible reputation. People think he's crazy than any of the other politicians. And you
Right.
mentioned special interest. Everyone knows that these special interests exist, but nobody asks tough questions about how much influence they have.
Yeah, I remember what I was going to say now. You brought it back. My uncle, or my dad's uncle, he told him back in the '70s, like, you need to hang on to these silver coins. So similar story to the vending machine story is what I was going to mention. So let's talk about which money is. I mean, I think you and I agree that gold, silver, Bitcoin, they all play their role. But what sort of edges do you think like gold and silver, specie money have over Bitcoin and vice versa today? Like, where would you say those, they have some sort of edge?
Well, I think that they have their edge is namely that they've been historically viewed as money for millennia. And that is something you cannot say about Bitcoin. Bitcoin's a highly volatile experimental asset in which you stand to make potentially riches. That's for sure certain. Whereas gold and silver, I always speak to like older individuals who Bitcoin is lost on them. They don't understand it. And perhaps it's not the best solution for them. It's hard enough helping them understand the benefits of gold and silver if they're going to have a 401k that perhaps some of it, they should have some of their money as well, alternatively in hard money and gold and silver. And so, I mean, when it comes to the benefits that gold and silver have over Bitcoin, I think it is that historical aspect. And anyone who's investing in cryptocurrencies should have gold and silver as really, I mean, I see it as a savings account. This is kind of the way I've always seen it, is that gold and silver is akin to a savings account, a modern savings account. We've seen examples of bail-ins in countries such as Cyprus. And when it comes to Bitcoin, you know, I see it as almost like a modern stock market, crypto particularly. I mean, Bitcoin's sort of the reserve currency of crypto, in my opinion. And I think we're going to see a lot of really fascinating news in the coming years and decades about Bitcoin. And I do see it as sort of the reserve currency for a new kind of asset class that is the cryptocurrency asset class. And these are highly volatile with, unspeakable opportunity. However, gold and silver is a much more conservative
Mm-hmm.
play, and one that I think kind of should underpin anyone's crypto strategy. And it really kind of dating back to the, Roman Empire, for instance, that gold and silver were seen as money, which actually delineates gold and silver from the other precious metals such as palladium and platinum, which are generally viewed as industrial metals. In fact, palladium has had the best decade of any of the precious metals. And with mighty high technology today, I see that there's a lot of potential in those metals still. A lot of people are more bearish on them because they think we're going to see an industrial slowdown in the economy, which I do agree to a
Mm-hmm.
certain extent. But I think we're actually moving into a high technological age. And I think these metals will play a role: silver, palladium, platinum in particular, and then gold. However, gold and silver do have that monetary element. They're viewed as money by pretty much everyone, either consciously or subconsciously. And I think that is really the real benefit to gold and silver. That's not investment advice.
Yeah, I think you nailed that too on the industrial use cases, which drive not just, where you have Bitcoin, which is very speculative, and there is a lot of monetary theory involved in it with finite supply, decentralization, but the ability to actually put silver inside a machine that everybody is using and will buy more of as time goes on is obviously a premier use case. So yeah, I think that's really important, and people should definitely look at that. Like you said, not financial advice, but with the debt, obviously, as I mentioned, over 26 trillion now, 26.55 trillion, and counting. $1 million every second as we're on here, and the money printer going burr. Seems like endless quantitative easing, even if they're not calling it that. What do you think? How high can these metals go?
What are they calling it now? I mean,
I don't even know what they call it, to be honest with you. I don't think there's a name for it. It's just a package or something that they call it now. They don't even call it QE, do they?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be too concerned about how high these things can go. I think that this is a foregone conclusion, and if you don't understand why, then you have a lot of research to do, and you probably shouldn't be opining on very much in this world. With that said, I think that we all have a great opportunity here to be our own kind of assets. We are the most important assets on this planet to ourselves as individuals, first and foremost. And so, therefore, what steps can we take to protect ourselves and our family in the midst of economic uncertainty? And for me, I think that's really leveraging the tools that we have at our disposal. On the precious metal side, there are ways in which you can, seek out deals on silver coins and gold coins, so maybe spending a lot of time on eBay, getting to understand the different coin markets on eBay and seeing where you are able to find some sort of arbitrage where you're maybe able to get a coin that is undervalued. Not too long ago, I bought a coin and the description was wrong, and I think that silver was misspelled. There were a bunch of errors. So I was able to get a silver coin for less than the spot price at that time, which was probably around $17. I think I ended up paying like $14 for it. Those are the types of arbitrages that exist, and we should all become a little bit more primed to recognizing and taking advantage of. Now, precious metals too, it's a very sophisticated and well-developed market. And while most people are seeking out the retail level, you can go to websites like comparesilverprices.com and see who's got the best prices on deals at the moment, generally speaking, as long as they're in stock. There's also wholesalers that you can actually, seek out and do business with yourself. You can go around the retail level. So there's Coins and Things, CNT in Bridgewater, Massachusetts, I believe, at least Massachusetts. There is Dylan Gage in Texas. There's APMEX, or I'm sorry, not APMEX, but AMARC in California. And as you learn enough about the markets, you can go straight to these wholesalers, and the retailers won't tell you about this, but I will, because I think that it's important for people to become self-sustaining. I believe in kind of a decentralization of the U.S. economy in all shapes and forms. And that, I think, first and foremost comes from viewing each and every one of us as an individual with great potential. And the more of our own individual potential we're realizing, the better off we all will be. And on the crypto side of things, I think there's probably a lot more arbitrage, whether those in the early days were from faucets or otherwise. Today, you can look at the DeFi space. I've been spending a lot of time in the DeFi space. So if you have yet to learn how to use MetaMask, you should take a deep dive into the world of MetaMask and learn how to use it and be able to swap via decentralized exchanges like, say, Kyber Network, which is run on the 0x protocol, and swap, ETH for tokens or vice versa. Learn how to use DAI, MakerDAO. Learn how to get interest on your holdings. And there's many other DeFi protocols out there that are nascent. They're very new, and they're going to offer a lot of arbitrage. But you're going to need to learn how to use the terminal on your computer. If you haven't learned how to use the terminal on your computer, this is something that's not too hard. It's literally just copy and paste more times than not. Just follow a guide, open up your terminal, get lost. You will get lost a lot, but that's normal. I watch very avid developers get lost all the time, and then they solve a problem and they don't even know how they solved it. And that's just kind of the nature of DeFi protocol, or rather developing. So, I mean, I guess to answer your question, where are these prices going? I like to worry about that less and worry more about the ways in which we can all become businessmen, because I think that being a businessman has been kind of it's looked down upon when it should not be.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Again, this is all about investing in your human capital and education. So, become an autodidact if you can, or at least improve on that, and, learn as much as you can about things, and you'll be better off in the world. And then, like you mentioned, whether it's eBay or finding an arbitrage, having an edge over other people because you put in the time. that's not criminal, you know. So I think that's important to understand. And that, like, you also mentioned with the dApps being built, like the DEXs and stuff. I'm huge on that too, and I think that that's going to be the new way that capitalists just function, and you can already see it occurring with the Winklevi brothers and things like that. You know, people like that are obviously more forward thinking. You know, it's important to not only you and I, people like us, but you have these billionaires now that are really seeing the value, and they'll really lead a lot of this development too. So I think we're going to see a lot of cool stuff being developed with just the free market and, you know, peer-to-peer voluntary interaction, you know, the basis of capitalism. So I like the way you mentioned that as well. What's your approach to personal, like, I don't know if you want to talk about this or not, but like personal diversification? Like, is there a certain allocation that you like to hold in you know, the gold, silver, Bitcoin, DeFi sort of realm, or is it just kind of, is it fluid and kind of changes over time, or how do you approach that sort of stuff?
It's kind of fluid and changes over time. I like my focus is strictly on, you know, producing value. And like for instance, as a writer, that's kind of been the meat of my labor over the last 10 years, I'd say. And I seek out monopolies in writing. I think that seeking out the monopoly in whatever your talent is highly valuable. And this is advice that Peter Thiel has given. He's obsessed with having a monopoly. So like with gold, silver, Bitcoin, you know, we buy and sell precious metals, but that's not much of a monopoly. There's a ton of competition in that space, and the margins therefore are very, very low. But when it comes to writing, I like, for instance, you know, pick the hardest topics that I can cover, which generally comes down to learning how to use some of this DeFi technology, like learning how to use Maker, and then documenting it and teaching others how to then use it. So that is the way that I sought out a monopoly in writing in order to make enough money to have a savings. And that's what I would suggest people do, is like focus less on the you know, ratios that they have, and more on providing as much value to the world as possible, positive value, and producing whatever it is you produce, and then worrying about the allocations later. And you know, I love precious metals. I think they're so nice to hold, something that you can't do with Bitcoin, which I think might be an advantage, especially as we move more increasingly into a digital world.
Mm-hmm.
There might be some nostalgic value in the precious metals, being able to hold something physical and tangible. But certainly seeking out these monopolies in writing, which is my main talent, is something that I think about long before I start thinking about allocation. So like I say, you know, when MetaMask came out, you know, I wanted to be one of the first to learn how to use MetaMask, but I documented it as well. And that was the content that I produced, or Maker, etc. BlockFi I've looked into recently, kind of a less DeFi, but certainly something that a lot of people are talking about today. Learning how to use the DEXs, which for some might be a black box, but I kind of, you know, took a leap of faith and dove into them and then documented that, which has, I think, which gives me, in my opinion, you know, a monopoly, as opposed to if I were to write about the news, in which
Absolutely.
there's a ton of competition there. And so, I mean, to answer your question, you know, I own the domain goldsilverbitcoin.com. I think that, you know, says everything that people need to know.
Yeah, I love that domain. You got in on that one early, I think. I don't know when you registered that. Do you remember? Was it pretty early on?
Yeah, it's July 2012.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, you were way ahead of the curve on that. Yeah, I also like what you said about Peter Thiel. I'm also a Peter Thiel. You know, I find a lot of inspiration in what he says, and that I really like what he says about competition. And I've actually watched the speech a few times or listened to it recently that he gave in 2014 at Stanford. I think it's called Competition is for Losers. And while we love competition as consumers, as business owners, monopoly is, you know, the goal. So you can learn a lot from Peter Thiel, and that's another he's invested in RSR, I believe, which is Reserve Rights Protocol, and I'm not sure if you've looked into that one yet. It's a cryptocurrency that's already gaining some traction in like Venezuela and South America, I believe, where they're trying to do a stable coin called RSV, but RSR is they're using a basket of goods to try to create this stable value because they don't believe that, backing it one-to-one with a fiat currency is a good idea, since obviously you and I don't really believe too much in fiat money. But
yeah, I want to say something on a monopoly. I think now that's a bad word, right? A lot of people don't like monopoly. However, like if a company has a monopoly, it only has that monopoly because it's providing such good products and services, and it's also treating its employees well, because you provide good products and services by having happy employees. Now, that's not to say there isn't going to be a competitor that comes along and wins business away from you and undermining your monopoly, which then actually, even if you have a monopoly, you're always competing still, but you simply competing to maintain the monopoly. Competition too, it's almost like a bad word these days. And if you shy away from competition, like maybe you're weak. Maybe you're a weak person who is filled up with angst and fear, because competition is a way in which we inspire one another to be better and to improve. It's a friendly competition. It's a brotherly competition. It's not a cutthroat competition that has kind of been the signpost of capitalism or free markets. It's a brotherly competition, and people don't understand that. I think they're scared of competition, and a lot of that comes from the fact that people don't believe in themselves. I think that the power of the individual has not been marketed, has not been discussed in our time, and therefore we have a epidemic. The true pandemic is the lack of confidence that the individual has in the modern age, and I think that with more confidence, with more emphasis on the individual, comes more kind of production and value for the greater good, if you will, to borrow.
Yeah, the utilitarian good. If you want to use that word, I'm not a huge fan of utilitarianism. But what Peter Thiel was talking about, and you elaborated on it there, is not the monopoly that where you get, really monopoly is a government grant or privilege. And I learned that, reading Rothbard. You're not going to get that in your economics book in college or anything. They want, like you said, they want to make the capitalist the evil guy that is oppressing you in some way, and that's just not the way it is. But like you said, it's about competition amongst each other to create the best good for consumers and for people out there to have a better life. And it's important that people like you and I think continue to just write this stuff, because it has been lost on a lot of like millennials and younger people like us. So I commend you for doing that as well. Do you think that it is, moving on here, do you think that it's possible at all? I kind of already have a feeling that on your answer here, but I have to ask you, that governments can create sound money and it have any sort of staying or lasting power over time, or is the the whim of the man and inherent greed too much to overcome?
That's a deeply important philosophical question. I'm going to kind of like zoom in a little bit, because I think, I don't think that we can like change things too much in our present situation, but I believe we can kind of promote certain fundamental kind of ideas that have been the bedrock of our situations or societies. So for instance, you asked me that question, and we need to come to terms in this nation, in the United States in particular, and really the world, with the fact that the US Constitution and the Bill of Rights are powerful documents that outline the importance of the individual and certain freedoms, such as the freedom of speech, which we've seen undermined lately on social media, and other inalienable rights, unlike other documents that we have at our disposal and therefore bases of government. So, you've asked a philosophical question. I'm going to kind of Americanize it and simply say that I think that people need to go back and they need to take a civics class, which they can do on YouTube or on the internet, and learn about the American Revolution, particularly the ideas thereof. Now, it's important to distinguish the American Revolution from the War of Independence. These are two different things. The American Revolution was a revolution of ideas, and it led to the War of Independence because these ideas were so in opposition to the king. And some of these ideas centered on rugged individualism, liberty, freedom. Mm-hmm. And now those are also bad words. People think that these were kind of foundations of, the genocide of the Native Americans, et cetera, which they weren't. These are actually two different historical processes with complicated explanations and histories in and of themselves. But when it comes to the American idea of governance, I think that we need to kind of start from there, particularly in the United States, if perhaps even in the West, to really learn about, the purpose of government, which in my opinion is to kind of safeguard our rights and liberties before we then discuss whether or not government can ever, go uncorrupted. I think that, there's a theory in physics, I believe, the theory of entropy, in which all closed systems or systems tend towards chaos. But I would, it's a great question. But when you ask it, I kind of go back to sort of the founding of the United States, because people don't even understand what the heck was going on then, because we haven't been taught it. Right. Hupton Mifflin didn't teach us it. And if you haven't gone back and spent many hours researching it, then you, again, don't have any idea what you're talking about and should not be partaking in any sort of discourse about, the way things are. And I wrote recently on July 4th, a article on gold, silver, Bitcoin, and there's a YouTube video too called "What is America?" And I examined these ideas from Common Sense by Thomas Paine, which many of the parliamentarians in England didn't think had much sense about them, the Cato letters of that time, to really learn about what they were thinking, what the American Revolution was all about, mm-hmm. and how it was not the War of Independence, and how that was something different, and what the ideas that fueled the revolution were. So that kind of gets us then back to sort of Austrian free market economics, individual liberty, etc. Right.
Yeah, great job explaining that. Anybody that hasn't watched your videos, I highly recommend those as well, or read your stuff. I try to digest it whenever I can. On to sort of a follow-up question then. Hans Hermann Hoppe was Murray Rothbard's basically understudy. He recorded a lot of the lectures that I enjoy listening to, where you can actually hear Murray Rothbard hitting the blackboard with the chalk, and it's so much cool stuff. I love going back and listening to those. It's one of my favorite things to do. I don't know how much you've read Hoppe. Do you think that there is, he sort of outlined, he sort of carried the baton, in my opinion, and sort of like, outlined a more of a means to an end, or sort of like a way to create this private law society? Do you think that, I'm personally an anarcho-capitalist, and it sounds to me like you pretty much are too. Do you see, first off, are you an anarcho-capitalist? And second off, do you see a world where a private law society is possible, where we could have competing, jurisdictions, where not necessarily a state per se, but these sort of like the Greeks or something did back in the day, where they actually compete for our you can move with your feet, and they compete with they compete amongst each other for our basically where we stay, where we live.
I would consider myself probably more constitutionalist these days, and I think it's because we need to, in my opinion, borrow upon ideas from the past that people can relate to, or which they can sort of latch onto. And I believe that the ideas in the Constitution are far easier for people to grasp than the notion of an anarcho-capitalist society. I
Right.
think that, any sort of push for an anarcho-capitalist society would probably be co-opted and turned into chaos, like so many movements are. And that's why I like to look back and understand kind of the principles of what the kind of American republic is based upon.
Hmm.
And that in many ways is much different than the history thereof and where that history led. In terms of private law, I believe that we should have choice. We should have choice in our money. I don't believe, that gold and silver should be money. I don't believe that the US dollar should be the only money. I believe that we should all have choice to transact in any way we see fit. So if that means you go down to your local small business and they want your Michael Jordan rookie cards for some groceries, then albeit they can accept those Michael Jordan rookie cards for groceries, or then they can accept silver, or then they can accept Bitcoin, or they can accept US dollars. And I believe that we should probably, work towards a city that is more along those lines. In fact, I read an article recently out of Washington State in which a small locality actually was started printing its own local currency. I'm not sure if you saw that. And there's been movements like this not only throughout history, but in Germany, there's been some local currency experiments. Now we've got one in Washington State. That is in line with that thinking where individuals should be able to trade whatever they want for anything they want. And same goes when it comes for kind of dispute resolution. I think that having a government that protects the rights of individuals to a degree, particularly when it comes to antitrust, and I'll get to that next, but dispute resolution between individuals, you can either go to the, publicly funded resolution center or court and work through a dispute, or perhaps you want to settle it privately through a private resolution center. I believe that we should have those choices. And then when it comes to antitrust, I think that the government needs to be powerful enough to undermine the forming of massive, to litigate or to manage antitrust situations where you've got huge corporations that amass massive amounts of power. But before we get to that point, we need to have the discussion about how some of these corporations get that much power. And all too often it's via subsidy.
Right.
So it's via government investment or government aid. I mean, Jeff Bezos just got like a $27 billion bailout,
Yeah.
And so while I do believe that the government should be strong enough to kind of ensure that we don't have like a Google that controls information on the planet now and is censoring, I also understand that without government, there might not be a Google.
Yeah, this is a very interesting, and you and I probably could talk a whole entire show about this one. This is the only thing I think you and I sort of disagree on. I think I kind of feel that the state has a monopoly on violence, and from that comes a territorial monopoly, and then obviously a judicial monopoly stems from that. So I think that there should be a way to, and you kind of talked about that, a way to get independent arbiters. I don't think we should have to go to the state for a claim against the state. I think that, that's a rigged game in my opinion. So, but it is interesting to talk about the whole idea. I think you and I will have to have more of these conversations because you're fun to talk to and you have a lot of knowledge. But yeah, I think that there's definitely different ways to look at it. And I also understand where you're coming from as like sort of the constitutionalist idea where, as you can see, like you mentioned earlier in Portland and stuff like that, where if you have nothing, there would definitely be some sort of like transition, which would involve a lot of chaos to a private law society too. So you have to weigh that as well. How do you get there? And what sort of destruction and stuff would happen along the way. Definitely. It's definitely a fun thing to like an abstract to talk about though.
And I think we could avoid a lot of that chaos if people who understand the principles of the U.S. Constitution were to run for office all across the nation and create a I forget what it's called. There's a word in Congress, but a coalition, right?
Hmm.
Like liberty and freedom needs a powerful coalition in our government in order to safeguard the principles this nation was founded on. And I believe that that should be our highest priority in this nation, especially in a time of such chaos. And therefore, we can potentially avoid a lot of the chaos that you suggested might happen in the transition from, any sort of new kind of society. And I think we're seeing that in Portland and Seattle and Chicago and all these cities in which there's like a, you know, seemingly on the surface grassroots movement for a new type of society.
Right.
But as you dig deeper, you start to wonder like how grassroots is this thing and what interests are at play. But I think that's a different discussion, and this is why I really kind of like to look back at the ideas of the American Revolution and this tool we have that is government currently to perhaps affect some change.
Right. Yeah. A friend of mine, name drop Spike Cohen, just won the vice president nomination for the Libertarian Party. So I think it's important for you. There's a role, in my opinion, as well, like to stop to at least hold our ground. As people that believe in liberty and natural rights and stuff, and hopefully, they can continue to grow the libertarian ethos and get it out into the mainstream. I think this is a good opportunity right now with the way we do have social media. It's bigger than ever, and just being able to get that message out to people. I think people are ready to hear something new. Last question for you. Actually, I have two more quick ones here. Yeah, and actually, Spike was on the show, so if you haven't seen that, check it out. I think what he's talking about is pretty solid, and he has a lot of he shares a lot of you and I's ideals. To the last one before the one I follow up every show with, what do you think about the dollar? There's a lot of speculation that it could collapse. But people like you and I have been anticipating that for a long time. Will the dollar eventually collapse, and could it happen this decade?
I'm not going to answer that question. What I will say this is that, like, look, we can only control what's right in front of us in our own lives, and we all have just one very valuable life to live here on this planet, and as far as I know. And therefore, like, I really encourage everyone to, seize each and every day to really don't rely on other people to pull you up or to help you along the way, but rather seek out all these tools that are available to us. I mentioned eBay earlier on the precious metals side to find certain arbitrages, and then the DeFi space and cryptocurrency to learn the kind of mechanisms of business, or to learn the habits of business and really kind of start like buying and selling things. Go walk down an alley in your neighborhood and there's free stuff there. Take it and put it on Facebook Marketplace and make $10 to $20, and do this repeatedly, and really just kind of turn your entire life into a money-making operation, because I think that it is one way in which we can take control over our own lives as these big macro trends unfold all around us. And and seek out your passion in life. I mentioned sports cards a couple times. Be real safe, because that will collapse one day soon, but it's kind of been in a frothy moment. And perhaps there's arbitrages there to be made. I mentioned silver coins. One thing I like to do when it comes to the silver market is I like picking out silver coins that are reasonably priced but have something cultural on them. So for instance, Disney silver coins typically trade at a premium. However, there's all sorts of kind of pop culture references on these coins that you can seek out and buy, which I believe will hold more value over time, just simply because of that cultural stamp on them. People might hold some value in them because of the nostalgia factor. In 20 years, if you've got a Marvel comic coin that you were able to get around the spot price of silver in 2020, it might have or trade at a higher value simply because of that the inscription on it. That's one idea of a arbitrage in the silver industry. You and I have spoken about pre-1933 gold coins too. Pre-1933 gold coins is a very soft market right now. These are coins, gold coins that used to be circulated as money, speaking of the dollar. And they, for instance, $1 was like 0.92 of an ounce of gold, I believe. And or I'm sorry, I believe $20 was 0.92 of an ounce of gold. And you could go and you could buy in 1900, from what I've heard, a suit jacket for one gold coin for $20 at the time. These are still available on the market, but they've really fallen out of favor, especially as our generation has become adults. But I think that therefore there's going to be arbitrages there for people to seek out. The Indian head gold coin is a beautiful coin, for instance, and getting kind of emotional here, which never is a good thing to do when it comes to money. But nonetheless, I think there's opportunity there in the pre-1933 gold coins, particularly from the history lessons perspective. And then on the DeFi side, there's so many tokens. You can examine these projects and get to learn what they're all about, understand the team, understand the processes, and perhaps, as you have with Link, pick a winner. Mm-hmm. I would always say default back to Bitcoin and gold and silver before you get too wild with any of these tokens, because the risk factor is through the roof, but therefore the potential is through the roof as well. And so when it comes to the question at hand, I would try to, focus less on that, although history gives us lots of insight into that process, and focus more on our day-to-day ability to kind of, do business.
Two things I wanted to ask you about or mention here. First, I love the hustle. Talking about the arbitrage on eBay, finding things to sell or do arbitrage on there. That was the way I created passive income that I've never talked about on here. Last decade was I would put out like, I'll come collect your books for free. People want to get rid of their books. They're moving. They're sick of them, whatever. They're taking up space. And I had a woman call me, and she gave me an entire warehouse full of books that I then put on Amazon and stuff like that. So there's always a way, if you're a creative person and you have the desire to, become a capitalist or create some sort of income. And then I wanted to follow up on what you said about pre-1933 gold. Is that because is it pre-1933 gold because because that's the year Roosevelt confiscated the gold? Is that the significance of that year?
Yes, sir. And I believe we stopped making gold our money then in the first devaluation of our currency, as far as I know, was then debased of the gold content, and that's where you get paper dollars. And at first, these were gold and silver certificates. Then they were one day not. Right.
No longer redeemable. And here's the last question I wrap up every show with. I really appreciate your time today. You've been generous with it. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I hope you'll come on again sometime. What I wrap up every show like this. What does Bitcoin mean to you? I know you're a gold guy too, specie money, but Bitcoin, what does it mean to you?
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Bitcoin is a lot of things to me. I have a lot of questions about its origins, its origin story, and it is befuddling to me that we actually do not know where Bitcoin came from. But Bitcoin to me represents a digital experiment based on the principles of Austrian economics and scarcity, and also as an alternative to, the way of the world into which we were all born. And while I don't believe it will always remain such a staunch alternative, I believe that it will be co-opted and is being co-opted and has been perhaps co-opted at this point by, commercial interests, and perhaps to the extent where it's even manipulated. I do see it as a novel experiment in really kind of free market principles.
I love it. Austrian economics. That's what got me into Bitcoin. So you and I agree on that. And I also wonder who exactly was the genius or group of geniuses that came up with it. Mr. Justin O'Connell, thank you for coming on the show today, sir. Do you want to tell people where to find all your work other than your website, or you want to drop that link again?
goldsilverbitcoin.com.
Hang on one sec. Yeah, hang on one second. Everybody go check out his website right now or as soon as you're done listening to this, and I'll say a proper goodbye.